The gas station was quiet, the kind of place people only stopped by for fuel and a quick snack. Today, a group of bikers roared in, filling the air with laughter and revving engines. They were looking for amusement, something or someone, to pass the time. Standing alone by a gas pump was a lone figure, a man in military attire. He appeared calm, his face unreadable as he refueled his car, paying no attention to the noise. The bikers exchanged glances, smirking. They saw his silence as weakness, an easy target for a few laughs. They had no idea who they were dealing with, a man who had faced far more than they could imagine. Unbeknownst to them, their attempt at a joke would soon become a lesson they wouldn't forget. The soldier wasn't one to be provoked easily, but today, they would push him past his patience. The soldier continued refueling his car, his gaze steady, focused solely on his task. He wore an old, weathered jacket with military patches, signs of service that only those who'd been there could truly understand. To the bikers, though, he was just another guy, a quiet figure who seemed too reserved for their liking. They were used to getting reactions, stirring people up just to break the monotony. One of the bikers, a tall man with a wild beard and a mischievous grin, nudged his friend. "Look at this guy, all serious, like he's the last action hero or something," he muttered, his voice carrying just enough for the soldier to hear. His friend, a wiry guy with a faded bandana, chuckled, glancing over. The soldier didn't flinch or react. He simply finished pumping gas, his movements calm and precise. This only spurred the bikers on, seeing his indifference as a challenge. They were certain they could get a rise out of him with a little extra push. "Hey, soldier boy," the bearded biker called out, raising his voice, trying to grab the soldier's attention. "You looking for a fight, or just lost in thought?" The others laughed, the sound loud and mocking, echoing off the metal pumps and empty parking lot. The soldier looked up briefly, his expression unchanging, and then went back to his task, capping the tank and preparing to leave. His calmness unsettled the bikers more than any angry words or gestures could have. It was as if he hadn't heard them, or simply didn't care. This only fueled their determination. Another biker, stockier and covered in tattoos, stepped forward, crossing his arms as he sized up the soldier. "What's the matter? Cat got your tongue?" he sneered. "Think you're too good to talk to us?" The soldier paused, meeting the man's gaze with an intensity that momentarily caught the biker off guard. There was something in the soldier's eyes, something sharp, an unspoken warning, but he said nothing, just turned back to his car, ready to drive away. The bearded biker wasn't about to let him go that easily. "Aw, come on, don't be shy," he taunted, stepping closer. "We're just trying to have a little fun. Why so serious?" His voice was laced with sarcasm, daring the soldier to respond. Still, the soldier remained calm, his face impassive. He glanced at the men surrounding him, assessing each one with the kind of look that made them pause, if only for a second. His gaze was steady, unflinching, a look of someone who was more than prepared, someone who knew things they couldn't imagine. Seeing that he still wasn't reacting, the bearded biker took it a step further, moving into the soldier's space. "You think you're tough, huh? Just 'cause you wear that jacket?" he sneered, pointing at the military patches with disdain. The soldier finally spoke, his voice calm and measured. "I'm not looking for trouble." The words were quiet, but they carried a weight that seemed to linger in the air. He met the biker's gaze directly, not a hint of fear in his eyes, but the bikers only laughed, misinterpreting his restraint as weakness. They exchanged amused glances, their confidence growing as they fed off one another's energy. The stocky biker stepped closer, emboldened by the soldier's quiet response. "Well, maybe trouble's looking for you, soldier boy." The soldier's gaze flickered briefly, a flash of something unreadable crossing his face. He took a slow, steady breath, centering himself. This wasn't his first encounter with men looking for a fight, and he knew how to handle himself. But he also knew that sometimes the best approach was patience, to let others reveal their intentions before deciding on his next move. The bikers saw none of this, only a silent man who hadn't risen to their taunts. They couldn't see the restraint behind his calm, the strength he held back, and they certainly didn't realize they were towing a line they'd regret crossing. The bikers weren't satisfied. They wanted a reaction, a sign that their taunts had hit home, but the soldier's stoic demeanor only intensified their resolve. To them, he was a mystery, and mysteries were meant to be cracked open. One of the bikers, a lanky man with a scar across his cheek, sidled up to the soldier. "You military types think you're so tough," he sneered, looking the soldier up and down. "Bet it's just an act." The soldier didn't take the bait. He stood with his hands by his sides, his face composed, offering no response to the biker's provocations. He was aware of his surroundings, of the growing tension, but he maintained his calm, choosing silence over confrontation. "Hey, soldier boy," the bearded biker chimed in again, stepping closer. "Maybe you didn't hear us. We're just trying to be friendly. Don't you want to be friendly back?" He emphasized the word with a mocking smile, his friends snickering as they watched the exchange. The soldier glanced at them, his expression unreadable. In his mind, he was assessing each one, cataloging their stance, the way they moved, the shift in their postures. He had been trained to notice these things, to see potential threats before they even materialized. And though he didn't perceive them as serious threats, he knew that men in groups could be unpredictable. Seeing no response, the lanky biker gave a smirk and reached out, tapping the soldier on the shoulder. "Come on, man. Don't be rude," he said, his voice dripping with false friendliness. "Aren't you gonna say something?" The soldier took a measured step back, his gaze steady, his body language remaining calm but alert. "I'm not looking for any trouble," he said again, his voice even. His words weren't defensive, merely a statement, a reminder that they could end this here if they chose. But the bikers weren't interested in backing down. They saw his restraint as weakness, a sign that he was intimidated by their numbers. They mistook his calm for passivity, not realizing that it was taking every ounce of his discipline to remain that way. "Trouble? Who said anything about trouble?" the bearded biker replied, raising his hands in mock innocence. "We're just having a little fun." The lanky biker laughed, looking to his friends for encouragement. "Yeah, don't get so uptight, soldier. We're just trying to get to know you. Maybe you can show us some of those moves they teach you in the military." Another biker, a shorter, muscular man with tattoos crawling up his arms, joined in, crossing his arms and grinning. "Yeah, show us what you got, soldier boy," he taunted, his voice challenging. The soldier stayed silent, his gaze shifting from one man to the next. He felt the tension building, like a taut wire waiting to snap. They were testing his limits, pushing him, trying to provoke him into a reaction, but he knew better than to give them what they wanted. His restraint was rooted in years of training, in the understanding that real strength lay in control, not aggression. But the bikers couldn't see that. They saw only a man who hadn't yet responded to their jeers, who hadn't risen to their challenges. To them, he was just another guy, a quiet man in a military jacket, someone they could prod and poke for amusement. The shorter biker took a step closer, his face just inches from the soldier's. "What's the matter? Cat got your tongue?" he sneered, his tone dripping with disdain. The soldier held his ground, his gaze unwavering. He didn't flinch, didn't show any sign of discomfort. Even as the bikers closed in around him, he could feel their stares, their taunts pressing against him, but he remained calm, his face a mask of quiet resolve. The lanky biker laughed, a harsh sound that grated against the quiet of the gas station. "Guess he's too scared to say anything," he muttered, nudging the shorter biker. "Not so tough without backup, huh?" The soldier's gaze moved between them, his patience wearing thin. He could feel the tension reaching its breaking point, the line between provocation and outright aggression blurring, but he held his ground, waiting, giving them one last chance to back off. Unaware of the restraint he was exercising, the bikers smirked, convinced they had him cornered. They thought they had the upper hand, oblivious to the fact that the soldier's silence was a warning, one they would only understand once it was too late. As the bikers continued their taunts, the soldier's mind drifted, recalling the lessons and experiences that had shaped him. He wasn't just another man in uniform. His life had been molded by rigorous training, hardened by the challenges only a select few would ever know. Discipline, restraint, and precision had been drilled into him from the very start, and those lessons had carried him through more trials than he could count. He remembered his first day of training, when a commander had looked him in the eye and told him, "Strength isn't just about physical power. True strength lies in knowing when to act and when to wait." Those words had stayed with him through grueling drills, endless hours under the sun, and missions that took him into the heart of danger. He had learned the value of patience, of biding his time until the right moment revealed itself. He wasn't a man who sought conflict, but he was always prepared for it. In his world, hesitation could mean life or death, and every decision had to be weighed carefully. He had learned to measure his actions, to anticipate the moves of those around him, to read the intentions hidden behind words and gestures. In the midst of battle, he had faced men who were ruthless, skilled, and unyielding. He had fought in places where rules didn't exist, where survival depended on his instincts and training. He had learned how to neutralize a threat in seconds, how to read the terrain, and how to navigate situations that most people would never encounter. This training had transformed him into a man who could withstand fear, who could remain calm in the face of chaos. But his time in the field had also taught him the power of restraint. He had seen what happened when tempers flared, when control was lost. He understood that sometimes walking away was the most powerful action a man could take. To him, strength was not about intimidation, but about knowing when to use force and when to hold back. As he stood surrounded by these bikers, he could feel their ignorance pressing in on him. They had no idea who they were dealing with, no understanding of the experiences that had shaped him. To them, he was just a quiet man, an easy target for their taunts. They couldn't see the depth of his patience, the discipline that held him steady. They saw only what they wanted to see, a man who hadn't yet responded, a man they thought they could provoke without consequence. The soldier looked at them, his mind calm, his breathing steady. He was a fortress of self-control, every movement calculated, every reaction restrained. He had been tested in ways these men could never comprehend. To him, their jeers were nothing more than noise, distractions that had no power over him. But the soldier knew that every man had his limits, that even the most disciplined could be pushed too far. He was determined to hold his ground, to let them reveal themselves first. He had no desire to escalate this encounter, but he also understood that sometimes men like these needed to be reminded of their place. The bikers, of course, were oblivious to all of this. They laughed, nudged one another, and continued their taunts, feeding off the silence of their target. They saw his calm as a sign of weakness, his refusal to engage as proof that he was intimidated. The soldier's gaze moved over each of them, noting the tension in their stances, the arrogance in their expressions. He knew that they had likely never faced real adversity, that their bravado was a shield against the insecurities they carried. They were men who believed that strength was about dominance, that respect was earned through intimidation. He had encountered men like this before, men who used bluster to hide their fear, who relied on numbers to feel powerful. He had seen it in places far from home, in enemy combatants who underestimated him, in people who thought his calm was a weakness. The soldier held his ground, letting the moments pass, letting the bikers circle and taunt him. He understood that patience was his greatest weapon, that each second he waited was a second they revealed more about themselves. He didn't need to speak, didn't need to prove anything to them. His strength lay in his silence, in the quiet confidence that radiated from him, even as they closed in. He could feel his muscles tense, the instinct to act simmering just beneath the surface, but he reminded himself of his training, of the lessons that had carried him through the most challenging situations. This wasn't a battlefield, and these weren't enemies. They were just men who had mistaken his calm for cowardice, and he would show them the truth only if he had to. As he watched them, he felt a faint sense of pity. They had no idea what they were up against, no understanding of the strength that lay within him. They thought they were playing a game, but they were unwittingly testing a man who had faced far greater threats. And if they continued, they would learn, one way or another, that some men were simply not to be provoked. The bikers continued their jeers, each one louder than the last, trying to get any reaction from the soldier. But he remained unmoved, his gaze steady, his silence unwavering. They couldn't understand why he didn't flinch, didn't lash out. It only fueled their determination to break through his calm. Finally, the soldier raised his hand, a subtle gesture that made them pause. He looked directly at the bearded biker, his eyes calm but firm. "I'm going to tell you once," he said, his voice low but resonant. "Walk away." The words weren't a threat, yet something in his tone sent a chill down the biker's spine. For a brief moment the laughter ceased, and the bikers exchanged uncertain glances, but pride and bravado won out, and the bearded biker forced a smirk. "Oh, we got a tough guy here," he sneered, nudging his friends. "Thinks he can tell us what to do." The soldier didn't respond. He simply stood there, his face impassive, giving them a chance to reconsider. In his mind, he calculated his next moves, every option carefully weighed. He hoped they would heed his warning, that they would recognize the unspoken line they were about to cross. One of the bikers, a stocky man with tattoos up his arms, took a step forward, grinning. "What's the matter, soldier? You scared of a little fun?" The soldier met his gaze, unflinching. "This isn't fun," he replied evenly. "It's your last warning." The bikers snickered, but there was a new edge to their laughter, a nervousness that hadn't been there before. They couldn't understand why his calmness was so unsettling, why his silence seemed more dangerous than any threat he could have made. The stocky biker gave a mocking laugh, gesturing to his friends. "Look at him, all serious. Thinks he's better than us." The soldier took a deep breath, his patience wearing thin. He had faced situations far more dangerous than this, and he knew that sometimes restraint was the hardest thing to maintain. But his training reminded him to hold back, to give them one last chance to walk away. "Go home," he said, his voice steady. "This isn't a fight you want." For a moment, the bikers faltered, their bravado shaken by his unyielding gaze. They could feel something they couldn't explain, an invisible line they were afraid to cross, but they didn't want to lose face, especially not in front of each other. They fed off each other's confidence, each man's pride reinforced by the presence of his friends. The bearded biker took another step forward, forcing a laugh. "Or what, soldier boy? You gonna make us?" The soldier's gaze hardened, his calm exterior giving way to a quiet intensity. "If you push any further, you'll find out." The bikers laughed again, but it was weaker, tinged with unease. They couldn't shake the feeling that they were missing something, that the man before them was not as ordinary as he appeared. They were men who thrived on intimidation, but now they were the ones feeling its weight. But their pride wouldn't let them back down. They couldn't understand that the soldier's restraint was not weakness, but a deliberate choice. In their world, strength was about dominance, about forcing submission. They had never encountered a man who carried strength quietly, who didn't need to prove anything to anyone. The soldier waited, his stance relaxed but ready. He hoped, for their sake, that they would take this last opportunity to leave. As he looked into their eyes, he knew that their egos wouldn't allow it. They had mistaken his calm for cowardice, his patience for passivity, and now they were about to learn that they had pushed him as far as he was willing to go. The bikers weren't finished. The soldier's warnings only spurred them on, fueling their need to show him that they were in control. They moved closer, their circle tightening around him, each one watching for any crack in his composure, any sign that their taunts were getting through. One of the bikers, the shorter man with tattooed arms, stepped forward, grinning with false bravado. He reached out and shoved the soldier's shoulder lightly, testing the waters. "Come on, soldier. Don't just stand there like a statue. Show us what you got." The soldier didn't move. He felt the push but remained steady, his gaze unwavering. He didn't flinch, didn't react, and this unnerved the bikers more than he realized. His stillness was intimidating in its own way, a silence that felt heavier than any punch. The bearded biker joined in, his tone mocking. "What's the matter, hero? Cat got your tongue, or are you just scared?" The soldier's gaze met his, calm and unyielding. "You've had your chance. Walk away." The bikers exchanged glances, smirking, feeding off each other's confidence. The shorter biker gave another shove, this time harder, his face twisted with amusement. "Oh, we're just getting started," he sneered. "Let's see if you're as tough as you look." The soldier took a deep breath, his patience wearing thin. He felt the familiar tension in his muscles, the instinct to act. He could feel his limits being tested, his restraint stretched to its breaking point. He had given them every chance, offered every warning, but they hadn't listened. The bearded biker reached out, grabbing the soldier's arm. "Come on, soldier boy. Show us what you can do." In an instant, the soldier moved. His hand shot up, breaking the biker's grip with a swift, practiced motion. He held the man's wrist firmly, his gaze sharp and unyielding. "This is your last warning," he said quietly, his tone carrying an edge that hadn't been there before. The bikers paused, taken aback by the sudden shift in his demeanor. For a brief moment, they saw the strength he had been holding back, the force that simmered beneath his calm exterior. It was a glimpse into something they didn't fully understand, something that made them hesitate, but the hesitation was brief. The shorter biker laughed, stepping forward with a sneer. "Let him go, tough guy, or you'll have all of us to deal with." The soldier released the bearded biker's wrist, his movements controlled, his gaze steady. He could see that his warning hadn't registered, that they were too wrapped up in their own bravado to see the danger they were courting. "Fine," he said, his voice low but resolute. "Then don't say I didn't warn you." The bikers closed in, their confidence bolstered by their numbers. They couldn't see that he was more than ready, that every muscle in his body was poised for what was coming. They thought they had him cornered, but they were about to find out just how wrong they were. The soldier's patience had run out. He had given them every chance to walk away, but they had chosen to push him past his limits. Now they would face the consequences of their decision, and they would learn that there were some men who should never be provoked. With a final, steadying breath, the soldier prepared himself. The line had been crossed, and there was no turning back. As the bikers pressed in, their confidence was clear, each one moving with the arrogance of men who believed they had the upper hand. But the soldier was done holding back. His patience had worn thin, and the calm restraint he had exercised so far gave way to something sharper, a readiness that flickered in his eyes. The first biker lunged, a wild swing aimed at the soldier's face. In a smooth, practiced motion, the soldier sidestepped, catching the man's wrist and twisting it with precision. The biker let out a grunt of pain as he was forced to his knees, the soldier's grip firm but controlled. The others hesitated, momentarily taken aback, but pride urged them forward. The bearded biker, anger flashing in his eyes, took a step forward, fists clenched. "Let him go," he snarled, charging with a force fueled by his bruised ego. But the soldier was ready. He released the first man, letting him fall back, and shifted his stance to meet the bearded biker's attack. The soldier's movements were swift, each action deliberate and efficient. He blocked the incoming punch with ease, countering with a quick strike to the biker's shoulder that sent him stumbling back. The soldier didn't pursue, maintaining his ground, his expression calm even as the bikers regrouped, a mix of shock and anger visible on their faces. Another biker, the shorter, tattooed man, growled in frustration and swung a metal pipe he had picked up from the ground. The soldier dodged, the pipe whistling past him, missing by inches. Before the biker could recover, the soldier closed the distance, grabbing the pipe and twisting it out of his grip. With a swift motion, he threw the pipe to the ground, his gaze locked on the man before him. "Enough," he said, his voice steady but carrying an unmistakable warning. "Walk away, now." The bikers froze, the weight of his words finally beginning to sink in. They saw now that this man was not like anyone they had encountered before, that his calm wasn't a sign of weakness but of control. Yet, their pride wouldn't let them back down so easily. Their reputations, fragile and bruised, demanded they put up a fight, even if they sensed they were outmatched. The lanky biker, who had been watching from a slight distance, made a final attempt, lunging forward in a reckless charge. The soldier met him halfway, sidestepping with a fluidity that left the biker off balance. With a controlled motion, the soldier placed his hand on the biker's shoulder, redirecting his momentum and sending him sprawling to the ground. One by one, the bikers attempted their attacks. Each one met with the same calm efficiency. The soldier blocked, countered, and deflected, never using more force than necessary, but always maintaining control. Within moments, the bikers found themselves on the ground, defeated, their bravado shattered. They looked up at him, expressions a mixture of confusion, pain, and a newfound respect. For the first time, they truly saw him, not as an easy target, but as a man who had faced far more formidable challenges than they could imagine. They had pushed him, tested his limits, and now they were faced with the consequences of their arrogance. The soldier stood over them, his stance relaxed but vigilant. He didn't gloat, didn't revel in their defeat. Instead, he looked at each one, his gaze steady, as if silently reminding them of the choices they had made. He didn't need to say anything. His silence spoke volumes. The bearded biker, clutching his bruised arm, managed to sit up, glaring at the soldier with a mix of resentment and something else, something that looked almost like respect. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. He realized in that moment that he had nothing to say, no taunt that could justify his actions or diminish the man before him. The soldier took a step back, giving them space, his expression softening just slightly. "It didn't have to be this way," he said quietly, his voice carrying a hint of regret. "But you made your choice." The bikers looked at each other, the weight of his words sinking in. They had expected an easy target, someone who would cower or fight back with clumsy punches. Instead, they had encountered a man who was in complete control, someone who had only acted when forced. And now, as they nursed their bruises, they understood the strength that came from discipline, from a restraint they could hardly comprehend. Slowly, they began to pick themselves up, dusting off their jackets and trying to salvage what little pride remained. The soldier watched them, his expression calm, his gaze unwavering. He had given them every opportunity to walk away, and now they had no choice but to accept the consequences. Without another word, the bikers began to back away, their heads lowered, the silence between them heavy with unspoken understanding. The soldier didn't move, simply standing there, watching as they retreated, humbled by a man they had failed to understand. As the last biker disappeared into the distance, the soldier let out a quiet sigh, his posture relaxing. He hadn't wanted this confrontation, hadn't sought out conflict, but he had done what was necessary. His calm returned, and with it, a sense of peace, knowing he had acted in line with the discipline he had spent a lifetime building. He looked around. The gas station now quiet, the echoes of the fight fading into the evening air. He knew he would remember this encounter, not for the fight itself, but for the reminder it had given him, that true strength lay in patience, and that sometimes the greatest victories were the ones that left no scars. News of the incident at the gas station spread quickly. The few onlookers who had witnessed it shared the story with friends and family, each retelling adding a touch of awe. People were fascinated by the soldier, A man who had faced down a group of bikers without breaking a sweat, without losing his composure. He was the talk of the town, the quiet hero who had reminded everyone of what real strength looked like. The bikers, however, felt a different impact. They were used to being the ones who commanded respect, who instilled fear with their presence. But now, their pride was wounded, their image tarnished. They were no longer the feared crew. They had become the group who had been bested by a single man. They tried to avoid the whispers, but the embarrassment clung to them, a constant reminder of their defeat. One evening, as they gathered at their usual bar, they sat in silence, the atmosphere thick with frustration and resentment. The bearded biker, who had led the confrontation, couldn't shake the memory of the soldier's calm, of the effortless way he had deflected their attacks. He felt humiliated, his confidence shattered. "We can't let him get away with that," he muttered, breaking the silence, his voice laced with bitterness. "People are laughing at us." "At us?" The others nodded, their faces dark with anger. They were used to being in control, to being the ones who decided how things went. But the soldier had turned their world upside down, and they struggled to come to terms with it. One of the younger bikers, his face still bruised from the encounter, looked at the bearded man, his voice hesitant. Maybe we shouldn't mess with him again. I mean, he gave us a chance. We were the ones who pushed him." The bearded biker shot him a glare, his pride unwilling to accept defeat. "He made fools of us. You want people to think we're weak?" But even as he spoke, he sensed a shift among his friends. They didn't seem as eager, as confident. They remembered the soldier's calm gaze, the way he had looked at them with a patience they hadn't understood. The experience had left a mark on them, a seed of respect for a man who had shown them what true strength looked like. Meanwhile, the soldier continued with his life, unfazed by the stories circulating around him. He hadn't set out to become a topic of conversation. He simply did what was necessary. The incident at the gas station was just another moment in his life, a reminder of the principles he lived by. He understood why people were fascinated, but he hoped that they would focus less on the fight itself and more on the lesson it held. In his mind, real strength was not about defeating others, but about understanding when to hold back, when to let go. He had learned that lesson through experience, through years of discipline and reflection. One afternoon, as he sat at a quiet cafe, a young man approached him. "Are you the soldier everyone's been talking about?" the young man asked, his eyes wide with admiration. The soldier looked up, offering a polite nod. "I'm just passing through," he replied, downplaying the significance of the encounter. He didn't see himself as a hero, as someone to look up to. He was just a man trying to live by the values he had learned. The young man seemed undeterred by the soldier's modesty. "Well, whatever happened, it was inspiring. My dad told me about it, and he said he hadn't seen anyone stand up to those bikers like that." The soldier simply nodded, a faint smile on his face. He didn't need recognition or praise, but he understood that the encounter had resonated with people. Perhaps, in some way, it had reminded them of the power of patience, of strength that didn't need to be loud or aggressive. Across town, the bikers continued to wrestle with their defeat. They had come face to face with something they couldn't intimidate or control, and the experience left them questioning themselves. For the first time, they were forced to confront the limits of their power, to consider the possibility that they had misunderstood what strength truly was. For the soldier, life moved on. He found peace in the quiet moments, in the routines that grounded him. The incident was behind him, but the reminder it carried stayed with him, that strength lay not in dominance but in control, that power was best wielded by those who understood its weight. And as he went about his days, he hoped that the bikers too would learn that lesson, that someday they would come to understand that true respect was earned not through intimidation, but through actions that showed character, restraint, and integrity. In time, the rumors and stories would fade, but the memory of that encounter and the quiet strength it revealed would remain, a silent testament to the power of patience and the discipline it took to hold back. In the days following the incident, the town buzzed with talk of the soldier and the bikers. People shared their versions of the story over coffee, in line at the grocery store, and even at the local mechanic's shop. The details grew with each telling, but one thing remained constant: the soldier's quiet strength. He had come to represent something more, a reminder of integrity and restraint, of power used wisely. The bikers, on the other hand, found themselves on the other side of admiration. Their reputation had taken a hit, and the pride they once held was now tarnished. Some locals, those who had long been wary of them, took the opportunity to make jabs, questioning how tough they really were. They felt the sting of those words, their usual confidence shaken. Snake Tattoo, the bearded leader of the bikers, took it hardest of all. He was used to commanding respect, but now he could hardly walk down the street without feeling people's judgment. He sat alone in the corner of the town's bar most evenings, stewing over the encounter. His friends were around him, but the camaraderie felt strained. They no longer seemed to rally around him as they once did, and he could sense that their loyalty was no longer unquestioned. One night, as Snake Tattoo sat nursing a drink, one of his buddies leaned over, glancing at him with a mix of concern and frustration. "Man, maybe it's time we let it go," he said, his tone careful. "The soldier gave us every chance, we pushed him, and we know how that ended." Snake Tattoo's jaw clenched. He didn't want to hear it. "You think we should just forget it? Let everyone keep laughing at us?" His friend shook his head. "Maybe they're not laughing as much as you think. Look, we crossed a line and he handled it better than we did. Maybe it's time we focus on that." But Snake Tattoo couldn't shake the humiliation, couldn't let go of the way the soldier had looked at him, with patience, as if he were more than a match for them, but had chosen restraint. The thought gnawed at him, taunting him far worse than any insult could. Across town, the soldier remained unaffected by the talk and rumors. He kept to his routines, slipping into the quiet background of the community, a life he had come to cherish for its simplicity. For him, the incident was over, just a moment in his past. One of many. He didn't dwell on it, didn't see himself as anything special for how he had handled the bikers. To him, he had simply done what needed to be done. He hoped the bikers might have taken something valuable from the encounter, a lesson about the real nature of strength, but he didn't expect it. People learned at their own pace, if they learned at all. His job wasn't to teach or to judge, but simply to live by his principles, to act in a way that aligned with the values he held. One day he caught sight of one of the younger bikers from the gas station, the one who had seemed the most shaken afterward. The young man looked up and met the soldier's gaze for a moment, then quickly looked away, a flicker of respect passing over his face. The soldier nodded subtly, a silent gesture that spoke more than words. He hoped the young man had found his own lesson in what had happened. For the soldier, peace wasn't something he had to find or earn. It was a choice he made every day, a commitment to himself. He had seen too much chaos to let pride or anger dictate his actions. He knew the cost of letting ego take control, and he valued his quiet life too much to give it up over a momentary conflict. But for the bikers, the memory of that day would linger, a constant reminder of the power they had underestimated. They had come face to face with a different kind of strength, one they didn't fully understand, and while the soldier moved on, they were left to reconcile their bruised pride with the reality of what true strength looked like. The incident had changed the town, left a mark that couldn't be erased, and even as the story faded into local legend, those who had witnessed it knew they had seen something unique, an encounter that revealed character in its rawest form, a man who chose peace over power, and the lasting impact of quiet strength. The story of the soldier and the bikers continued to ripple through the town. As time passed, details grew, each retelling adding new layers to the tale. People who hadn't been there claimed to know someone who had, and each version painted the soldier in a slightly different light. Some saw him as a hero, others as a mysterious figure with a hidden past. The coffee shops and diners buzzed with talk about him. Some said he had a history in special forces, that he had taken down a dozen men overseas single-handedly. Others whispered that he was a man with nothing left to lose, a warrior who had come to town to escape a life filled with conflict. Each version added a touch of drama, turning the quiet man into a local legend. The more people talked, the more the soldier became a symbol of strength, of control, of a calm that went beyond mere silence. He had become a kind of myth, a story people told to remind themselves of a strength they rarely saw in everyday life. People admired him, not just for what he had done, but for what he represented. The bikers, however, found themselves on the other end of these stories. While the soldier was elevated to near-hero status, they became cautionary tales. They were the ones who had underestimated the quiet man and paid the price. The respect they had once commanded around town was slipping away, replaced by skepticism and even scorn. Snake Tattoo, the leader, couldn't go anywhere without feeling the weight of people's judgment. He heard the whispers, the snide comments that seemed to follow him wherever he went. Every time he passed by someone, he wondered if they were talking about him, about the day he'd been shown up by a man he had mocked. The defeat had bruised more than just his body, it had scarred his pride. In quiet moments, when he was alone with his thoughts, he found himself replaying that day, searching for something he could have done differently. But no matter how he turned it over in his mind, he couldn't shake the image of the soldier's calm, unyielding gaze, the restraint that had felt more powerful than any show of force. It gnawed at him, a reminder that there were men in the world whose strength wasn't rooted in intimidation, but in an inner peace he didn't understand. Meanwhile, the younger bikers began to question their loyalty to Snake Tattoo. They had followed him for his confidence, for the way he could command a room, but now he seemed different, smaller somehow. They saw the soldier's actions as something admirable, a display of strength that had left a lasting impact on them. Some even began to avoid Snake Tattoo, uncomfortable with the way he clung to his bitterness, refusing to let go. Across town, people continued to speculate about the soldier's past. The rumors only grew, each new version more dramatic than the last. To some, he was a ghost from a dark world, a man who had walked away from violence but kept its shadow close. Others said he was a vigilante, a man who protected those who couldn't protect themselves, a silent guardian in a town that had once been ruled by men like the bikers. But the soldier paid little attention to the stories. He went about his life with the same quiet routine, a life he cherished for its simplicity and calm. He hadn't come here to be anyone's hero, to prove anything to anyone. The incident at the gas station was over for him, a moment in the past that he didn't dwell on. Yet, he noticed the subtle changes around him, the nods from townsfolk he barely knew, the way people seemed to go out of their way to show him respect. He understood that his actions had made an impact, that people saw him differently now, but he didn't let it change him. He had learned long ago that true strength came from within, from knowing who he was and choosing to live by his values. The bikers, however, were still struggling to understand what had happened. They had expected a fight, something quick and simple, a clash that would prove their power, but they had been confronted with something deeper, something that challenged their very idea of strength. And in the weeks that followed, some of them began to wonder if they had misjudged not only the soldier, but also themselves. The town moved on, as all places do, but the story of the soldier remained. People would tell it for years, each version evolving, but the essence remained the same, a tale of a man who showed strength through restraint, who taught a lesson without ever raising his voice. For the soldier, the incident was behind him, a chapter closed, but for the bikers, and for the town, the memory lingered, a quiet reminder of what true power looked like. The soldier found himself on a quiet evening walk, the air cool and still around him. The stars were out, scattered across a clear sky, and he took a deep breath, feeling a sense of calm that he had come to cherish in his life here. The incident with the bikers felt like a distant memory, something he had left behind with no lingering resentment or regret. But as he walked through town, he noticed one of the younger bikers standing alone outside a closed shop, his head down, hands in his pockets. The soldier recognized him immediately, the young man who had been hesitant during their encounter, the one who had looked conflicted even in the heat of the confrontation. There was something different about him now, a quietness in his posture that hadn't been there before. The young biker looked up, noticing the soldier, and for a moment, neither of them moved. The soldier offered a small nod, a gesture of acknowledgement without any expectation. He didn't know why the young man was there, or if he had come seeking anything at all. After a brief pause, the young biker spoke, his voice soft, almost hesitant. "I wanted to say I'm sorry for what we did." He looked away, as if ashamed, and then met the soldier's gaze again. "You didn't deserve that." The soldier nodded, his expression calm, understanding. "It takes strength to admit when you're wrong," he replied simply, his voice steady and without judgment. The young man shifted, a faint, embarrassed smile crossing his face. I guess I didn't really know what strength looked like until that day," he admitted, glancing down at the ground. "I thought it was about being tough, showing people up, but you showed me something different." The soldier didn't respond immediately, allowing the young man's words to settle between them. Then, with quiet sincerity, he said, "Strength isn't about forcing others to see it. It's about knowing it within yourself." The young biker nodded, his face thoughtful, as if hearing those words for the first time. There was a gratitude in his eyes, a silent understanding that spoke of a shift within him. He wasn't the same person who had stood at the gas station fueled by bravado. The encounter had left an impression, one that had changed him in a way he hadn't expected. "Thank you," he said finally, his voice almost a whisper, for not making it worse than it could have been." The soldier gave a slight nod, acknowledging the sentiment without dwelling on it. He didn't see himself as someone who had done anything special. He had only acted in line with the values that guided him. But he understood that the young man needed this moment, needed the closure that a simple word of forgiveness could offer. As the young biker walked away, his steps lighter, the soldier felt a sense of peace settle over him. It was moments like this that reminded him of the power of restraint, of the impact that patience could have on others. He hadn't set out to teach anyone a lesson, but he realized that sometimes The smallest actions left the deepest marks. The soldier turned and continued his walk, his heart steady, his mind calm. He knew he couldn't control how others saw him or what they chose to do with the moments they shared, but he could live by his principles, carry himself with integrity, and trust that those values would resonate in ways he might never fully see. In the quiet of the night, the soldier found a renewed appreciation for his life, for the choices that had led him here. He hadn't needed to prove anything to the bikers or to himself. The lesson had been simple, and it was one he had carried with him through every trial and challenge. True strength was never about power over others. It was about the peace he carried within. And as he walked through the stillness, he knew that no matter what stories people told or how they remembered him, he had lived in a way that honored the person he strived to be. For him, that was all the closure he needed.